Hi, this is Richard Dunn from Evoca. In this video we're going to start working on the actual smoke particle for our torch. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create smoke material. Now this is going to be very simple, very much like the embers one was. But the first thing we need to do is import our smoke texture that we've just made. So we'll go import to wherever you've saved your images. And we have smoke targa, and in this case we have an alpha channel, so we don't want compression no alpha ticked for this one. It's a smoke and it's a texture, so we'll go OK, and there it is. And then we right click, save our package. And what we're going to do now is we're going to select that texture and we're going to go make new material. And we're going to call this a material smoke mat. Okay. Now if we open this up, we have our texture. So if we open this up, we have our texture, and all we're going to do here is we're going to multiply our texture by A into emissive, and we need a vertex color just like we did before, which is going to get multiplied by the texture for our emissive, and we also need to multiply the alpha. So we'll multiply the alpha by the alpha and put that. Now we haven't set our material type yet, so this wants to be set to translucent unlit, and we'll plug that into opacity, and of course two-sided, and there we have our smoke material. That's all there is. So compile it and close it. Just going to save the work that we've done. File, save all levels. And save our package. And now we're going to create a new particle, and we need our existing torch that we're working on, and the same thing applies. We can now go into our material, have smoke, save it, have our smoke material selected, and then add that new emitter, and the same thing, you can see it's picked up that, which is great. So what we want to do now is really turn off all these things here, and we can see that our smoke is there. So let's give it a name. And one of the first things that you can see is that there's a lot of popping going on between the textures. So what we're going to do is come into required, and we're going to set our sort mode to age newest first. What that's going to do is it's going to take the ones that are spawning and it's going to put them in the front of the drawer order so that they take priority over everything else. Once you've done that, what we then want to do is go in and start looking at the size, because they're way too small. So we're going to come into initial size, and we're going to select that to about 180. Don't worry about the popping and the stuttering. That's just another thing that we have to deal with. And we'll set our min to about 80. Now we need to just see how that looks with the fire as far as scale goes. Yep, that looks okay for now. Okay, and something else that we can do here is just set these out to 0. Okay, we'll just turn our fire off again. Now we want to add size by life so that the scale of the smoke changes over its lifetime. So we're going to come in here and we're going to add in size by life, and it comes with 2 points by default. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the first one just in the X to 0.5, and we'll zero out the other two. As you can see, we're starting to get the sort of shape there that we would expect to see. And if we look at our second point, we have 1s. We don't really want to change that. We could double it. Double that. Gee, it's starting to get a little bit too chaotic. So we're just going to leave those back at 1. And then we're going to come into lifetime. So with lifetime, let's set our maximum to 1.5. Now I personally don't think that's enough. Let's try 2. That looks pretty good to me. So now we have the same issue we have with the sparks. We need to add a location cylinder. So let's click in here, location cylinder, and let's turn on its visibility, and let's set its initial size to 10, and try 12. So we've set our cylinder to 12 radius, and the next thing we want to do, if we look at this, something looks wrong, and that is because smoke never originates from the source of the burning. Smoke is a byproduct of the flame, so the smoke should start about 2/3 of the way up the flame. So what we want to do is we want to change the height of the spawning. And we want to set it on Z. Let's try 40. And suddenly you can see that it's starting to make sense. That may not be enough still. So let's try 50. No, that's probably too much. So we'll go with about 45. Although, if we look at it, our fire's going. Another trick you can do is just average that up to more or less where the top of the screen is. Just sort of where the white starts to drop. And just turn on your smoke. So our fire, technically our smoke is starting about halfway up. So 50 probably is a better number. Here we go. So now that we've nailed that down, we want to come to initial velocity. So we'll go into initial velocity. Now hopefully you get that all these figures is a matter of artistic license, as long as it looks right. You're going to be working with your own reference images as part of this unit. So you're going to be wanting to try and match the look of this to your images. What I'm doing here is creating a fire that matches my reference images for a torch. That may or may not be the case in your situation, and that is why you'll need to play with all these figures through here and try and get this looking how you want it to look. So in this case, we want to set this to about 20 and 20, and we're going to give it an initial velocity of about 250 upwards. So it's quite rapid. It needs to make sense with the speed of the fire, which that does. And down here, as usual, we usually do the opposite. Minus 20, minus 20, and let's say about 130. Now, because this is now shooting up faster, our lifetime is probably a little bit too long. So what we might do is bring that down to about 0.5, 1.5, sorry. Yep. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add velocity or speed based on the life of the smoke, because obviously the higher up the smoke gets, the slower it's going to get and the more it's going to dissipate into the atmosphere. So what we need now is a velocity by life. So we'll come into here, velocity by life. And we're going to come in here and we're going to need 2 points. We're going to need an end, a start and an end. So we're going to click on this cross. And in the first point, let's put in the values of 0.5. And let's just put these all to 1 as a starting point. It usually works. And that's what happens if you go too far. So there we go with the initial. Now with the next point, we'll go a little less than half its lifetime. Let's go to 0.4 and set these to 0.4. Yep, that looks pretty good. Now, I should also mention this smoke is a generic smoke. At this stage, we have no color in it. It's just looking at our texture that we made in Photoshop. We can totally color this smoke to any color you want, the same way we did the fire by using the color over life, which we will do. UDK does not have the ability to do lit particles, meaning the emitters do not emit light as such. You have to fake that with a light. And the trade-off of that, or the downside of that I should say, is that the smoke will not take any light from the particle. They're two completely separate entities, remember. So we have to fake the light from this fire in the smoke. And that's what we'll get onto soon. Now the biggest problem we can see with this is our textures aren't rotating, they're not spinning. We have the same shape repeating over and over again. So what we need to do is we need to set an initial rotation. So let's come into rotation, initial rotation, and this is just a constant value. It's either 1 or anything between 0 and 1. 1 being a full 360 degrees. So what we've got there is fine. That's actually what we want. And if you look at it, you can already see if we stop this, let it start coming back, we have the same pattern. As soon as we enable this, now they're spinning and we don't see the same repeating pattern. And there it is, it's gone. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to put in an initial rotation rate. Now with the initial rotation, a big mistake that new people make to Cascade is they put large values in here and they just look really, really, really crazy. Let's look at -1. It's just too much. So what we really need to do here is just keep these very, very small. So if we go -0.1 and 0.1, that, you know, the subtlety of that is a lot better. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the subject we were talking about faking the illumination of the smoke with the fire. So we're going to do that with color by life, so that as soon as it's spawned in the world, it's orange, and then as it gets older through its life, it will turn into the default smoke color. So we're going to go into color by life, and we have 2 points. So we'll go into the first point, and we're going to go into the shader as percentage of its life. So about a quarter would be 0.25. We want to go a bit less than that. Let's go 0.18. So a 0.18 into its life, and then we're going to give it a color that matches the fire. So we'll start with 5, 1.5, and 0.1. So as you can see now, we have the smoke looking as though it's being lit by the fire, but we don't want it to be the same thing up here. So what I'm going to do here is show you how to customize the texture, the texture and the color of this smoke a little bit. So what we've got here is we've got our smoke coming out as orange and then going to white. So what we want to do is first of all move it so the orange is happening closer down, so it's not affecting as much of the smoke. So if we come down to the second point, we set it to 0.5, and watch what happens in the graph. This will move to 0.5. Now you can see that we have more white smoke being affected, less smoke being affected by the orange. The other thing we can do is we could actually change the color of the smoke to black. Now it's going to be a little bit hard to see on a black background, so we can change the background color by clicking up here and just changing the value to white for the purpose of this test. And we want, obviously 0 is black, white is 1. So we want a very dark smoke. We can go 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. So as you can see now, we have a very, very dark smoke. Now personally, I don't like it because torch smoke is white, so I'm going to put this back to 1. But now you can see, if you want your smoke to be darker and you want to change where it starts, I'm going to go back to 0.3. That's how you would do it. So we'll set our background back to black, and we're also going to need to fade these in because at the moment it's just popping in. So we need to come in and we need to do the tangents on these. So smooth, smooth, and auto curve. Now it's a little bit more natural. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to deal with the fading, the alpha. But looking at this now, I'm also seeing not enough spin, so I'm deciding to go back into here. So we're going to set this back to the full 360 degrees, 0 to 1. And we're going to add initial rotation rate. And this one definitely needs some more values. So we'll type in -0.01 and 0.01. Now we've got a much nicer looking smoke. So the next thing we're going to do here is just blend out the tangents on this point as well. Okay. Here we go. Now we need to deal with the fading in and the fading out of the smoke, because at the moment the smoke is there full strength from the beginning and full strength at the end. So we'll come back to color over life and we'll turn off color over life and turn on alpha over life. And as you can see, it just comes in and fades out. So what we need to do here is collapse color over life and open up alpha over life. And let's look at the first point. So we really want this to just be zeroed out. And then we'll go to the second point. Because at the moment we've turned it off, so it's very first at birth, it's not there. So now we want to come in a certain percentage. We'll go in about 0.2 and tell it to be 0.1. Here we go. So now it's starting to fade in nicely. It's still not fading out very nicely, but it's fading in nicely. So to try and combat the fading out, what we're going to do is add another point. And we'll just set this one to 1. And there it is. Much nicer, far more believable smoke. Now, the smoke isn't overly in your face, it's subtle, it's based off reference. You could of course increase the amount of smoke simply by playing with things like the initial size, the size over life, the velocity, the lifetime, even the spawn. You know, we could come in there and we could spawn double the amount. But it's not really doing a lot visually except adding to the overdraw, because we now have a lot more planes rendering on top of one another. So, you know, we could try even going back to 10 to see if it, as you can see now, it's a dead giveaway. We can see every single sprite. We can also come in here and look at those. There they are there. So if we go to 20, that looks pretty good. So that just about concludes the torch. We've got our embers, we've got our smoke, and we've got our fire with faked lit translucency on the smoke particle. So the theory of all that is pretty much consistent with most particle effects. When you start doing things like magic effects and things like that, obviously you can start getting very complex with these things. But I invite you to just play with the settings, throw in different modules and see the effect that they have. You can't really break things. You can always isolate things by turning them off. It's just fun. Just play with it and see what you come up with. But this should show you how to match your reference images for the fire and what sort of fields here that control what, so that you can try and replicate your reference images for your fire and smoke.